In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to replace a checkbox or a string field in Bonita with a drop-down box. And you might want to use a drop-down box if you want to limit the options somebody can enter into a field, or if you have a integer field and you want to display a name for each of those integer values. Maybe 1, 2, 3, 4 means something specific to your application, and you want to display that to your users so they can select the correct name instead of having to remember which number is which. You can use a drop-down box to do that, to limit their selections. So I'm going to modify this existing process that I did in the earlier tutorial, and I'm going to change the in stock option, and instead of it being a checkbox, we'll make it a drop-down box. So right now I'm going to edit my warehouse checking form, and that's going to open up our web browser. So you can see here we have our is in stock checkbox from before. And now we're going to go ahead and add a select box just above it. And now this is a default select box that doesn't do anything at all. So the first thing we're going to do is go down to our value for our is in stock checkbox, and we're going to copy this value and make it the value for our select box, because we want whatever is in the select box to be saved in the same place that the checkbox was previously saved. So we need to create a variable to store our relationship between our 0 and 1, which is what a checkbox is represented. 0 means unchecked, 1 means checked. And we need to map those numbers to the label we want to display on the form. So yes for 1 and no for 0. So we're going to create a new variable here within the user interface. And we're going to call it in stock. And it is going to be a JSON static type, and we're going to define an array which is going to hold objects that are going to contain our key value pair, so our label and our code we want to represent. So we're going to do a square, two square braces around the curly braces. The curly braces are for an object. The square braces are for an array, which is a collection of objects in this case. And we're going to create a name, which is going to be yes. And we're going to create a code that matches that name, which is going to be 1. So if the user selects 1 on our form, we want it to replace that with, if the user selects yes on our form, we want to replace that with a 1 when we try to save it to the database. And then we're going to have a comma because we're going to add a second object. And the second object is, again, going to have a name attribute, which is going to be called no. And it is going to have a code, which is going to be 0. So here you see I've got them in double quotes. If you are going to be doing something with strings, you're going to want it in double quotes. But if you're doing something with integers or booleans, true, false, you don't need to have the quotes. So I'm going to remove those, and I'm going to save that. So now we can see down here at the bottom, we've got a variable here in stock, which has the data we just entered. So now that we still have our new select box selected, we're going to give it a new name. So is in stock. And the placeholder is just select an option. The available values will be our object we just created, our JSON object right here that we just created. And it is called in stock. So we'll go in stock. And the displayed key is what's going to be displayed when that object is sort of loaded into the user interface. And we want it to display the name. And the return key is what it's going to save to the database when it saves the form. And in this case, we want it to save the code because we want it to save the 1 or the 0. And you could call these things whatever you want, your names of your attributes, but I just went with name and code. And then down here we've got our is in stock. So I'm going to save this and preview, and I'm going to show you one common error you're going to have to watch out for. So you see here it says select an option, and it does not have anything in this field. So there's no value in this drop-down box, and that is because we need to make the available values here a function, and now when we save and preview, we'll see that we have our yes and no options available here. So right here you'll see that there's an X next to the available value, so that it's a function call, and nothing, and not that for the displayed key and returned key. But you'll notice that when I click yes or no, it doesn't actually update the box. And that's because we still have our old is it in stock box here with a value as well. So we're going to go ahead, now that we've moved over our value from the old checkbox to the new select box, and we're going to delete that checkbox from our form, save, preview, and now we can choose yes or no. So we're going to go back now to Bonita, and we are going to redeploy our application. And we're going to log in as Rick, who is our process initiator. We're going to start our process check, go back as Rick. We're going to take control of this, and we're going to put in some garbage here. And we're going to check warehouse 1, make request. And Frank is the leader of warehouse 1. So I'll log in as Frank. And here's Frank's task, and now we see we have a drop-down box for Frank instead of a select box where we can say is it in stock or not. So we're going to go ahead and say yes, it is in stock. We'll inform the dispatcher, which is Rick, so we'll log back in as Rick. And we can see that there's a notify client task here, and we can see that on this form, because I didn't update the dispatcher form, it still renders as a checkbox. But you can see it is shown as checked because we selected yes in our form, and yes mapped to 1, and 1 means a checkbox is checked. So the reason you may want to do something like this in your form, like I said, is to limit the input a user could have into your field. So for the assignment, you have the option of, or you have to indicate whether an application is for a course-based or a thesis-based route. And depending on how you have created your business objects and modeled your process, you may have that as a text field, so a text box like this, or a string. And the issue with having something rendered as a string where someone needs to type in exactly, course-based or thesis-based, is that they could make a mistake when they're typing that in. So you could use a select box for that string to basically only give them 2 options to choose from, and then you can do a string comparison for your condition and not have to worry about somebody typing it in wrong. In that case, when you are comparing or you want to store a value for a string, your name and code in that case would be the same thing. You would have course-based here and course-based here in double quotes, and then you'd have thesis-based here and thesis-based here in double quotes. And that'll basically save that exact text back to that field, which is what you're going to want if you are using a drop-down box for a string field. So I hope that helps you with your assignment and customizing your forms. Let me know if you have any questions.